Hello and welcome back to the third episode of the Education Corner podcast. Today we're speaking to Mr. Simon Williams, the headmaster of Churches College, and we talked to him all about the entry points, how they've handled lockdown, the scholarships and bursaries that they have in place, and their extracurriculars. I hope that you enjoy.
Lovely to meet you, Mr. Williams, and I'm very pleased that we've been able to arrange this with so much going on at the minute around schools and closures and everything else, and I'm sure you're very busy. And we were thrilled to be able to include churches both in our autumn edition with Helena's article about their move to the countryside, and also with the recent article on reading by the junior head. And her recommendations for what to do over holidays and certainly during a lockdown. So thank you very much for those. What I was going to begin by saying with how are you all coping? I mean, it must be lovely that you've got the junior school and the senior school. But how do you feel everything is going for churches as a school with all the changes that have happened?
It's been a challenge. It's been a challenge for everybody. But the feedback I get is it's going well. And it's difficult for everybody because you're adapting to a new environment. The remote learning, online learning can be hugely beneficial in some ways, but hugely detrimental in others as well. Beneficial in the sense that it removes many of the distractions that school can present to the children, but detrimental is that actually children learn enormously from each other, and they're not getting that same feeling when they're working online as they are if they're all in the same classroom. We're tending to find that the children's enthusiasm, their energy, their interest, their passion for the subject is not diminished despite being online, and that's sort of either reflected by or they are reflecting the passion, interest and enthusiasm and innovation of the teachers as well. So from an academic point of view, the children are probably ahead of the game where they would be at this normal point in time if it were a normal year, partly to do with the fact there are less distractions, that there's less sport, there are less concerts, all those kind of things which remove children from the academic environment on occasions. But it's got to be more than that. It's got to be more than just the academic. And one of the perennial concerns we have with online remote learning is they are somewhat isolated from their peer group. And children, and especially teenage children, are desperate for that social interaction. That's why FOMO or fear of missing out, is so important to them. So we have to try and still have that social interaction, even though we can't all be in the same room or even in the same school. So the pastoral care that you give the children, even though it is remote, is just as important as that when they're within the school. The extracurricular activities are just as important, even not more important now they're stuck in their bedrooms at home rather than being at school. So we spend a lot of time, energy and effort not only making sure that academically they are getting their full desserts, but also we touch base on a daily basis with every child, and in small groups or on an individual basis each day. Members of staff are allocated to children, so they may have 4 or 5 children that they take away into what we call breakout rooms and have just a sit down conversation and talk about how's it going for you, how is remote learning, just so that they can interact with each other. We also encourage the children to have their cameras on. And for a somewhat self-conscious 13, 14, especially girl, but not just girls, boys as well, sometimes they don't like the camera on. But from a pastoral point of view, from a emotional well-being point of view, actually that visual interaction is just as important as the verbal. And I mentioned the extracurricular, and the thing that's amazed me is how clever people can be at working out ways of making things work, even if nobody can be in the same room. So we've had concerts, almost as many concerts as we normally have during the year, when the school was in session, but everybody was in a year group bubble, or even now remotely. The technology now of having a child record themselves singing, playing at home, and then knitting that all together into a concert is extraordinary. And it actually produces a pretty impressive product and something tangible for the children to say, actually, I was part of that and I get a lot of reward from that. Also, because the children have less distractions, there are less things that they can do. They get involved in activities probably more than they would. So we have photography competitions, we have art competitions, and actually some of the children who you'd least expect to be artists have really shown their talent. It's come to the fore. And we have the Art of the Week gallery, and right away across the school, from the junior all the way up to the senior, some of the art being produced at the moment is exceptional. And then there have been new activities. The staff are showing tremendous enthusiasm to offer something. So Amanda, who's a psychology teacher here, is offering cake decorating. Now, not normally a club that we would offer in the school, but actually the children are coming on board because they want something to do. And cake decorating, and they see those programs on television.
And they need downtime as well, kind of.
And then what else? Oh, cooking with Kev. So one of the PE members of staff, not somebody you would normally expect as some great chef and everything. He's on screen rather than jumping around like a PE teacher. He's cooking and he's teaching the children how to cook. And of course, he's got a lovely patter and a humour to it, and they really enjoyed that. We've got running clubs, we've got cycling clubs that are still taking place online, even though the children can't be there. The coning club, there's a dog training club.
Oh, that's brilliant! I need one.
One of the housemasters here has his own dog, who he's desperately trying to train, a puppy. And he's just sharing those experiences with the children, who seem to grab their own dogs and force their own dogs through the same exercises to varying success. We've got illustration club, we've got a coding club. There are a lot of children who probably actually are quite computer savvy anyway, but actually it's important that they interact with other human beings rather than just the machine. So the coding club appeals in both senses, that it still has them working with their machine, but has it in collaboration with a number of groups so that they get that social interaction. So all those things add into an equation are so important for the emotional and mental well-being of the children as well as the academic.
Yeah, it was going to be one of my big questions, actually, because it's fine. I'm going to question more. The mental health issues obviously is a big concern for everybody. And how do you feel? Particularly, obviously, the biggest change that's been announced since Christmas is the A levels and GCSEs. And I've upstairs got a daughter at Putney High doing her A levels, so I'm very much on the end receiving end of this. But how do you feel they're coping, and how are you addressing the change and the uncertainty? I mean,
that's the key word, uncertainty. Children are very adaptable. They are very stoic, but they just need to know where they're going and what's happening. They don't like uncertainty. It makes them feel insecure, and that's the biggest headache at the moment. And you have a daughter upstairs doing GCSE. A-level, I beg your pardon. Yeah. And I have Ben, who did his A-levels, or should have done his A-levels last summer. And for Ben, I mean, he went through the uncertainty last year, but actually he survived the uncertainty. But it was almost the thing you felt saddest about was the kind of the loss of the rites of passage that come with your last 2 years in a secondary school. The sixth form can be a really special time for lots of different reasons, but especially the social side. And you felt sorry that they'd missed out on many of those rites of passage. With this year's upper sixth and fifth year, again, we're in this no man's land of nobody quite knowing what's going on. The government Ofqual are out. Well, there's a consultation going on at the moment.
Yeah.
Last Friday, we got some inkling of what may be happening, but that will inevitably be modified, adapted slightly. So I think in about 10 days' time, they will publish the results of that consultation, and we'll have a little bit more clarity on what the summer is. But for the children who are in the fifth year and upper sixth, they now know there's not the normal A-level and GCSE exams. And you know when those are, even what time, what day you're going to do that exam, so you can plan your progress up to that point. At the moment, they don't know. They do know there's going to be some form of teacher assessment.
Yeah.
So they constantly think that every piece of work they do, every little piece of homework is being assessed and will affect their own grade. So we're actually having to say to the children, no, it's not that. There isn't a sword of Damocles hanging over your head constantly. We'll tell you when there's something, we call them landmark assessments, where there's something that we can use as to evidence the grade that we're going to submit on your behalf. And also, hopefully, we'll be back in school in the summer and we'll have some form of formal summative assessment in the summer. The government are talking about, Ofqual are talking about providing some externally set but internally marked assessments. But we don't know the details of that. So in the summer, there will be those opportunities for them to prove their worth in the exam hall. But almost we need to know those as soon as possible, just so that they can just work out their life for the next 6 months.
Yeah, and they've all done a lot, haven't they? They've got their EPQs in, they've done their UCAS forms. It's a lot of pressure, a lot of intensity. Certainly for someone like my daughter upstairs, she was revising for mocks. The mocks have been delayed. And it's a very anxious time, I think, anyway. And I think now it's doubled. And I think, as Mr. Dahl at Wellington said, when I spoke to him in November, he said for last year's A-level children, it was bad. But for this year's, they watched last year's go through it. And it's almost doubly as bad because they had an interrupted year last year. They saw what happened. And now it's happening to them. And I think that there's a sense of exhaustion.
Absolutely, yeah.
And a slight fear, I think, of burnout as well, of kind of revving up and then stop and then revving up and then stop. And normally Easter's when you're doing your big revise, but is it, as you say, constant now? It's very difficult to measure.
Right. And one other thing that's different this year to last year is it's all happened earlier. The upper sixth last year didn't know until the Easter holidays that A-levels and GCSEs were not going to go ahead. This year's upper sixth now know from January they're not going to go ahead. And so that it's extended the period of uncertainty.
Yeah, and I think there's advantages to the internet and the age of communication that we're in. But of course, I mean, I certainly know that there's a lot of WhatsApp messaging and the news are making announcements. So it's very real. It's a very real time. It's not something that they're finding out when the school decide to tell them. They're being, it's across the news. So
absolutely. And even when the news comes out or the directive from the government comes out, it's often almost inevitably last minute and maybe a knee-jerk reaction to the way in which the pandemic is going. And I can understand exactly why it has to be that way. But then it almost requires a knee-jerk reaction from the school as how best to react to the next instruction from the government. And that's never a great place to be when you're with children and trying to plan their future and their education, constantly just waiting for which way the wind blows.
Yeah, I totally agree. Are you now becoming beginning to set plans in place for the year 10s and year 12s, in case this goes on? I mean, or are we all very hopeful?
I'm a perennial optimist. I have my fingers crossed, but maybe the fact that the number of cases are dropping is indicative of the way things are going. Maybe that the vaccine coming in will improve situation significantly. I don't know. What we have learned through the whole of this crisis is you plan for one thing, prepare for anything. So we're planning for normality, but we're preparing for anything but.
And I imagine one of the questions that I wanted to ask, but obviously this is now effectively our third lockdown.
Yeah.
And certainly I know from the different heads that I've spoken to, the first one was very tough because it was very short notice. And suddenly all teachers, all staff, all pupils had to have the communication, the Wi-Fi, the electronic goods, everything in place to go online at very, very short notice. But I'm imagining this time it probably has felt a little bit smoother through the fact that we've kind of, I mean, all of us have adapted to some level to this slightly changed way of living.
Yeah, I think in lots of different levels. One is that we more used to using online software like Teams or Zoom or whatever, but also that families as themselves have got some kind of organization. Many families with maybe 2, 3, 4, even 5 children, all trying to get it online at the same time can cause frictions, if nothing else. But technically, it may be very difficult. But I think families have tried to find ways around that. But also schools have begun to understand that not everybody can be online at the same time. So it creates an extra pressure for the teacher, because the teacher basically ends up creating 2 lessons for every lesson. One is that live interaction, much as we're doing now across Teams, but also they are recording a lesson that can be utilized by a child who can't go online at that moment because big sister or big brother has stolen all the bandwidth. So it does put a greater pressure on the teachers and everything, but we have to show that flexibility to make sure that every child gets the access to the education. So far, it seems to be working well. And the key thing is that return communication. I've already mentioned that we have daily contact with the children, but we also have very frequent contact with the parents as well. Our heads of house, not just ringing up the children and emailing the children, they're ringing up the parents. And they're saying to the parents, how's it going? Any problems? And we have questionnaires as well as sort of free flow communication. So we can react, because every child reacts to the situation in a different way. But actually, as a family, the technical side of life can be very important.
Yeah. Have you been able to share resources with families that perhaps haven't had as much access? Because I mean, obviously, as you say, there's the Wi-Fi issue. There's a number of people in the house, but there's also the literal number of electronic computers, iPads that a family has, if mum and dad are working as well, and everything else.
We've been slightly fortunate in that sense. We haven't gone down the route yet. We were planning to, and we were working towards it, the bring your own device approach that many schools have. So as a school, we still have, I don't know, I think it's 600 plus desktops, but another 200, 300 laptops, iPads and things like that we are mobile units that we use in our normal teaching. And of course, all of those we can use to support families who have a shortage of technology at home.
Yeah. And obviously, I think everyone has been trying to support the local community in different ways, and local schools where perhaps, lower income families and children who perhaps aren't getting access to the education that they should be. Have churches been able to participate in this? And
We have to a degree. I suppose there's Petersfield is slightly fortunate in the sense of being in the southeast, and in a relatively wealthy area. We have a very strong relationship with TPS, which is the Petersfield School, which is the academy within Petersfield, and on Bohun School, as well as the other independent schools within the area. So we do share resources. TPS, which is our state school here, during normal non-COVID time, their children come and join our CCF. They have a contingent. We have the Churches College Army, Navy and Air Force contingents in our combined cadet force, but we also have the TPS Army contingent who come across to our school once a week. And Herne Junior, which is a state primary, is right on our doorstep, and they would normally be using our facilities on a regular basis. So I'm in very regular contact with Tony, who's at Herne, and Mark, who's at TPS, and we're there to react and respond in whatever way they need us to. Certainly, with respect to STEAM, STEM, we've added A to the word STEM because we like to think art ought to be in there, as well as the science, technology, engineering and maths. And we have a very buoyant STEAM hub going on within the Petersfield area, partly supported by actually the Royal Society for Engineers. And there are a lot of primary schools and some of the secondary schools in the area that are part of that. And although inevitably many of those activities are reduced or diminished, we're still trying to keep as many of them going as we possibly can, even though it's in some form of
a remote form. Yeah. I think it's been quite moving how the lengths that many people have gone to try to make sure, that everyone is accessing what they should. How are you finding? I know that you're the senior school end, but how are you finding with the younger children? Have you still got reception? Because obviously the younger they are, the Zoom meetings and the attention span and
absolutely
socializing and all of those things is very fundamental and very key. And I imagine that the teachers can't sit on Zoom for too long.
Well, I don't know. My hat goes off to any primary school teacher who manages to keep remote learning going. It's much more of a challenge than with the secondary children. Our nursery is still open because early years can be open. So our nursery is still working. And we have quite a significant number of critical workers in the junior school who are actually having sort of almost normal lessons. But we learned a lot from the last lockdown about what the children actually can manage online and remotely, both in the amount of time and the style of the lesson. And it needs to be as much as possible without expecting the parent to be the teaching assistant, because the parent themselves either have other children to look after or more often than not their own job to manage remotely. So the teachers in the junior school and our junior school have become really quite adept at keeping the children engaged. Basically, the timetable is sort of torn up a bit and re-managed to make it work remotely for the children, because their attention span is shorter. But it seems to be working. Certainly with the year 4s to 6, their lessons are really progressing very much as they did prior to lockdown, but in a remote sense. But with reception through to year 3, they will have, for example, they start the day with an hour's worth of maths mastery, and then they'll have some English. But it will be that block of maths is not just here you are, exercise 1, get on with it. It's very much adapted to the online learning and to the age of the children. It seems to be working really quite well, and you can be remarkably innovative, certainly with maths. The way in which you get children to do their maths doesn't have to be a pen and paper. There are so many cleverer ways of doing that, and the teachers in the junior school here are just absolutely fantastic at coming up with the most amazing ways of keeping the children involved, engaged, and when they don't really realise they're doing maths, they think they're doing cooking or digging or whatever, but actually they're doing maths.
Yeah, one of the things, and I think you touched on it at the beginning, but I was going to mention was, and particularly I suppose this would apply probably to the younger children, but are you seeing signs of learning gaps, or is it more the socialising and interaction that you feel that they're missing out on? Because I think it sounds like you're very confident that the actual learning is very much taking place within churches as a school. Yeah. It's more the socialising and sports and team games and things like that. That perhaps
it's all the things. I have 3 children: Dominic, Pippa, and Ben. Ben being the youngest, Dominic the oldest. Now Ben started walking and talking at an earlier age than Dom, and why? Because he had that role model. He had somebody to copy, and children learn as much by copying other children and older children than they do by any adult standing at the front of the class. And yes, they're missing out on that learning experience. And the younger you are, the more you're learning by absorbing what's going on around you. And it's quite difficult to absorb that when you're just staring at a screen. And so, yes, I would say that their progress is certainly not enhanced because of lockdown. No. And from a point of view of, well, I think Fionn probably suggested that when she did her article about reading, that one of the key things children need at primary age is to develop their reading skills. And the more you can read with the children, the more you can involve children in reading, the better. And one fears that when you haven't got whole class reading or all those normal activities that you go on, that they may be a step behind. Whether that will be any kind of permanent effect, I don't think so at all. Children have the remarkable ability to adapt. And how do I know this? Well, because we have children who come into the senior school from, we have something like 175 different feeder schools. And they're anything from a most prestigious prep school all the way to a tiny primary school where you may have 3 or 4 year groups merged. They come into the senior school, and within a very short period of time, you wouldn't know where they came from because they come up to speed remarkably quickly. So I think the children, all the primary school children, will generally come up to speed pretty quickly.
There should be a big catch up.
Yeah, one of the things we did find after the last lockdown, though, was that it's not just learning, it's natural behaviour that is modified by your environment. So at some stage, we thought some of the children in the first year were missing out on the role modelling that the senior pupils in the school can give. So under normal circumstances, you'll get an interaction between year group bubbles. But during last term, where you had to have that separation between year group bubbles, the first year weren't able to see or interact with the sixth formers, for example, in the same way as they would normally do so. So their behaviour was modelled more on the general behaviour of the year group rather than the older pupils. And I think in that they lost out slightly. But by the end of the term, I think they were catching up.
Yeah, I think that's the wonderful thing about young people. They are definitely so resilient.
Yeah.
Now, coming back to churches and probably what many parents, I mean, it was certainly when Helena came to me all that time ago and was thinking about schools. With churches, what would you say the best time or the best points of entry are for a family? I mean, people come to us as the consultancy, and they're always like, do I move them here? Do I wait till 11 plus? I tend to say the earlier the better. That's always, particularly with a school like yours, where there's the junior feeds through to the senior with a small test. But if you become a part of that community and a part of that ethos, and the children form friendship groups that become very long lasting.
Yeah.
for me, I think that is always my best recommendation. But is there a point? I mean, often, for example, we get asked with parents that are pregnant to do kind of projective reports if they move here or if they move there. What are their options that they can consider? There's all sorts of different things, because obviously choosing schools and where you live financially is one of the biggest investments that they're likely to make.
It is, but actually, if you want to ever give the most valuable bequest to any child, it's give them an education. So don't store up the money and give it in your will. Actually give it to them now, because it will have the greatest impact on them. So from my perspective, yes, if you like the ethos, if you like the feel of a school and the way the children in that school interact with each other, then engage with it early. Why wait? And some people ask me, how do I know? I said, well, under normal circumstances, just visit the school. And if it feels right in your gut, then it probably is right. If it doesn't feel right, then it probably isn't. It's much like when you choose a house. Sometimes you look at the estate agent's bump, and you go along and you think, actually, this is not my house. And actually, in those moments, just turn around and walk away. And almost that's the same with schools. But circumstance may not allow you to do that. Circumstance may not allow you to make a choice for your child from the age of 2.5 through to 18. So, and it may be that you have to join a school at the oddest of times, and certainly during COVID, where people's employment has probably changed direction. Their trajectory has changed direction with the pandemic. We've had some children joining us at different times, but there are some key entry points into the nursery, into reception at 4+, 7+, in that join between Key Stage 1 and Key Stage 2.
I think that's when Helena's children joined.
And then 11+ inevitably, 13+ and 16+ are the normal entry points. There is a slight question mark about things like 13+. At the moment, Churches is very buoyant when it comes to admissions, very buoyant indeed, in fact, remarkably so given the pandemic. But it does mean that we fill up at 11+. I have.
This is a question that I get asked many times, and I really do try to say to people, it is much better to move them for the 11+ when there are more spaces. By 13+, you are going to be looking at much fewer places. If it's not just a school.
We'll have sort of 250+ applying for 130 places at 11+, but we'll have 25 applying for 5 places at 13. So
it becomes tough.
The maths makes it very obvious.
Yeah, I totally agree. And obviously, I think you've just said you're not feeling that the pandemic has had any negative consequences for churches, but definitely we're seeing.
I said that.
As in,
would I rather not be in lockdown? Would I rather not be in the pandemic?
I'm meaning numbers.
Sorry,
I was going to say, because we're seeing a big move from the southwest London area, particularly, where parents are feeling they're moving, and I imagine that there must be an increase in inquiries as a result of that. I mean, you only have to drive around the streets and see the to let and for sale signs to know that there is a shift.
Petersfield's in the South Down National Park. It is beautiful, and well, not today because it's actually pouring down with rain because Storm Christoph is here. But normally, I can look out my window and I can see the South Downs, the hills, and we have plenty of fields on site and greenery and everything. So you get the freedom of space, and this area of Hampshire, if you've ever been down here, We're very close to the sea anyway, but there is so much space, so many walks and rides that you can go on around here, where actually you think I'm completely in the countryside. You wouldn't believe that you were in sort of 45 minutes of London when you're here, and you're sort of 20 minutes.
And as Helena said, you know, both of them actually work in London, but the commute is actually possible.
Yeah. And of course, post...
Not that they're having to do it any longer.
Yeah, exactly. Post-COVID, I think, although people will still inevitably commute, I wouldn't be surprised if instead of commuting 5 days a week, down to 3 days a week or 2 days a week, and for the rest of the time you're working from home. And actually, what you get here is a lot more land for your money, of course, but actually it's the space around your house, which is just as critical.
Two final questions. Scholarship. Sorry, my Labrador keeps sneezing. I don't know why. It's not me. But scholarships and bursaries. I know that you do offer them. Is there a best point for a family to approach you if they're perhaps unable to meet full fees, or is there a certain criteria that you tend to look for, particularly at the senior school?
We have means tested awards and merit awards. The merit awards are scholarships and exhibitions in the school, and they are general in the sense that academic is inevitably an important part of it, but we don't have a specific sport award or a drama award or anything like that. So a child getting an award, a merit award here, will probably be quite good in the classroom, but also be involved and contribute outside the classroom as well. Music is the only exception of that. We have music scholarships and music exhibitions within the school. The level of award, the value of the award tends to be relatively small, because the governors here, and quite rightly in my opinion, have determined that it's more important to keep the fee level for everybody at a low, great value for money level than just for an elite few. So we don't offer 50%, 100% scholarships here. We offer 5%, 10% scholarships. However, the bursary awards, we have what's called the Richard Churcher Foundation, because we were founded by Richard Churcher, hence his Churcher's College. And the Richard Churcher Foundation provides a significant number of bursary awards every year, and they're of two forms. They're what are called transformational, and the other one's transitional. Now, the transformational are for those parents, those families who, under normal circumstances, just couldn't afford a church's education. And for them, the bursary award may be 100%, maybe even be 110%, covering uniform and travel and things like that. The transitional awards are for those who are probably already within the church's system, but circumstances has turned against them, and it may be a loss of job or whatever. And again, those awards can be of any kind of level, right up to 100%, but they tend to be more short-lived than the transformational. You know, the transformational may be for the whole life of the child through the school, but the transitional may be for 1, 2, 3, 4 years, while they get through a little bit of a rough patch.
But it is well worth parents not looking at churches and thinking we could never afford this education.
Yeah. The earlier you get in contact, in some ways, the better. We don't provide many awards at junior school level, but at senior school level, there are a significant number of awards. And the awards are based upon the old government assisted places scheme, which we have extrapolated to take into account fee rises, salary rises, and inflation over the years since that was stopped in 2004 or something like that. And it looks at assets as well as income. So it looks at the family income, but it also looks at assets, because there are those parents who have very little income but have extraordinary assets. And we need to take both into account. But there is a means test process, and we ask for openness from parents, and we give openness in return.
Thank you very much. Last question, and I'm sure it's been asked before, but if you were to describe a typical church's child, I think parents sometimes they look at the websites and everything else, and
Yeah.
I think sometimes what they want is the hand in the glove, and that's obviously what we work very hard to try and help them with. But and I know that within any community, you can't say that you don't want everyone being alpha. You want a whole mixed community, but the sorts of qualities I think that you'd be looking for example, in interviews or if you were to meet the children, is there a kind of
in answer to that question, I often refer to personal anecdote in the sense that I think I've already mentioned I have 3 children, Dominic, Pippa and Ben, and when I started at Churches, Ben was 2, Pippa was 6 and Dominic was 7. Now at that age I had no idea where their talents and their aspirations would take them. So I was looking for a school where, irrespective of where your strengths lay, you were recognised equally. And certainly I didn't want any gender discrimination against Pippa as opposed to the boys. And that's what Churches offered back then, and that's what Churches still offers now. And it's not just what Churches, me as the head, wish, it's actually the way in which the children react to each other. So the children value, I don't know, playing in the orchestra as much as being first 15 fly half, or being an artist as being an academic, or being an adventurer as being a musician. That it is, they're all of equal import, which is great because it encourages the children here to keep fingers in lots of pies. So unlike the American high school system where you join the glee club or you're a sporting jock kind of thing, the children tend to be broad brushstroke in their levels of interest. And there is an enormous, the most extraordinary level of involvement in extracurricular activities here. And I'd like to take credit for that, but I can't.
Including dog training and cooking.
Yeah, it probably has something to do with Hampshire County in the sense that it's a sixth form college county. And in the state system within Hampshire, if you want to do A-levels, you go into a sixth form college. Which encourages my year 11, my 5th year here, and year 11s in the whole county to consider where they're going for their last 2 years, their A-level years. Now, at 11 plus, decisions tend to be made by parents. At 16 plus, they tend to be made by the young adult, the child. And that means that the children who stay on at Churches, and it's usually sort of 85% plus who stay on, and those children who come to us from outside, and I think this year we're around about 75 registrations of people wanting to come here, are really on side with what the school offers. And I mean offers inside the classroom as well as offers outside the classroom. And little kids copy big kids. And if the little kids see the big kids involved, the little kids will get involved as well. So there's this natural momentum of children really wanting to be involved in all the extracurricular offers within the school. And that's really very important to me because although your academic is a passport to your next stage, and most of the children here go on to university or music conservatoire or drama school or art college, they tend to aim for the top ones, the ones that are really tough in. So they need to get really good A-level grades. But once you've got through that door to university, actually A-level grades become yesterday's currency.
Yeah.
You need other talents to survive at university. You need to communicate. You need self-confidence, self-awareness, self-esteem. And an example I often use is that we are a direct licensing centre for Duke of Edinburgh Award because so many children here want to do Duke of Edinburgh Award. I think
children travel there, don't they, to actually do a lot of
they do. But if you imagine, especially on a day like today when it's pouring with rain, if you are up a mountain, cold, wet, miserable, it's dark and you're lost, but yet you find your way home, your self-esteem, your self-confidence just shoots through the roof. And it's experiences like that which will help you make a success of university and life beyond. So I think the children here, I don't know what you would call them, polymaths probably, the Renaissance men and women multi-talented, but with a competency and a confidence, which allows them, one, to progress on to the next stage of whatever they want to do, but also to make a grand success of whatever they go on to do as well.
And a very have-a-go attitude, it sounds like.
Yeah, very involved. They're not frightened to do something they're weaker at. Because often you learn more from achieving something in an area of weakness than you do achieving something in an area of strength. And the children here are confident enough, both in themselves and also the interaction and the reaction of their peers, to actually give things a go in areas which actually would not be a natural strength for them.
I think that's wonderful. I really do. Thank you so very much.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to the third episode of the Education Corner podcast. Thank you to Churches College and Mr. Simon Williams for this brilliant interview. Stay tuned for more podcasts and new magazines coming out very soon. Bye.